Welcome to the Uncommon Truth. Today, Bob and I have Dr. Sean Richardson joining us from the Gold Coast in Australia. I'm very excited to have Sean with us today, as I have known him for over a decade and have had the privilege of building a great relationship over that time and personally benefiting from his knowledge and experience, both personally and professionally.
Thinking here that it might be interesting to do a little bit of a slide share. I've got a slide that comes to mind. I call it the transition quadrants, and it really is about that, talking more about the emotional journey through change, but in particular in response to stress or challenge or even trauma or crisis. So it could be relevant. So I might switch to doing a slide share here that hopefully the video picks up, so you guys can let me know how that goes. I'm going to share my screen, and I created this slide and this model. I really adapted the original research from Kubler-Ross. I've pretty much bastardized all of her amazing work. So Kubler-Ross was a researcher who did a lot of research on grief and loss and the normal human response to that, and really probably what's a healthy transition through that. And if we're talking about change, it's valuable to talk about this model because this is talking about the green line here. The green arrow is really showing the healthy movement through change. So Kubler-Ross has got some amazing research in grief and loss. What I've noticed is that I've taken a couple of her concepts and then changed all the language, put my experience onto this, created a new model, and really something I've used both with business executives and athletes trying to be the best they can be, as well as, and I've got an interesting story about using this model with a team that lost the premiership, which in Australian football, which is kind of like the Stanley Cup of football over here, the grand final, and how I helped those players respond after that loss in the beginning of the season. And we actually went through this model. So it has all kinds of applications. Originally, it was understanding our responses to significant transition through grief. But it really applies to really any transition. We have to deal with our emotions first. And this is what it's suggesting. You see there's 4 numbers there: response, coping, meaning, and commitment. On the left-hand side of the model is emotions. And typically, however, what we think of as in terms of responding to change, some people are really good at just getting over change, just getting over a stressor or a threat. It's like something's happened, I just keep going. I'm stoic. I can march through it. And we feel strong and we can hold our head up high and go, it's not going to affect me. I'm just going to get over it. I don't want to dismiss that. There's a real functionality to people who can keep their head high and march through stress and threat and trauma and crisis and get back into action, get back committed, persistent action straight away. However, it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost. And sometimes it's a short term and sometimes it's a long term where it's obvious. But what it seems like, if we don't actually allow ourselves to be human and face our emotions and deal with that stuff first, it's not like they don't go anywhere. And what we know is that when people face stress, threat, trauma, crisis, and that often comes, and you could, with the uncertainty of change, if we just try to march through and get on with it, what's happening is we're going to take what are very normal automatic responses of our emotional brain, our survival brain, and we're going to just hold them inside. And there's some really, you can test this in a laboratory. There's some interesting research around this. Daniel Kahneman mentions that in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, but research around what happens when human beings, energetically, what happens when people hold emotions inside. And so one of the pieces of research they looked at was they gave 2 groups of people, they let them watch a short film, and the film was emotionally evocative. So, I'm not sure if I didn't see the film, whether it was violent, but it was emotionally evocative. They told one group of people to hold their emotions in, not let themselves feel what they're feeling. And we can do that. We can block ourselves off from emotions. And the others would have been allowed to experience their emotions as they were. What's even stronger around that is if you allow people to debrief and process their emotions and make sense of them, they have an even better experience of going through that. But then they let those people watch the emotions, the 2 groups, hold your emotions in or allow yourself to experience the emotions, and then give them a task. And one of them, in one instance, was a muscular endurance task. So squeezing a grip dynamometer, which makes your arm very tired. And how long can you hold on to that for? So a physical task. In other cases, they've given mental tasks, like a complex problem solving, which takes a fair bit of focus and brain energy. So you need energy to do that. And what they found was that the group that held their emotions in did poorly, more poorly at the physical task and the mental problem solving task. And the conclusions for that, or the hypothesis that were supported, were that holding stuff in is fatiguing. It fatigues your brain. It takes cognitive effort to hold emotions inside. You have to fight it in. We can be quite capable of doing it, but it's not like those emotions don't go anywhere. They just get locked inside. And unfortunately, they can wear a person down. Now, I can attest to this, as from doing clinical psychology practice, of dealing with people, in their 40s and 50s and 60s who might have been experiencing depression and mental health issues for a lifetime. And when we unpack it and we really dive deep into their life's experience, it turns out they've been holding in emotions since they're, 4, 5, 6, 10 years old. And it's just been wearing them down from the inside. And then they hit this breakdown point in their 50s. And we have to, in looking at this model, we have to go back and help them respond and cope and make sense of those emotions, help them just normalize and be human to feel what they felt and they've been holding in their whole lives. And then eventually we can make positive meaning out of their experiences and try to find the opportunities for growth and development, and then get back in action. So those 4 stages there. But really, like looking at that example from the research around just, watching a short film, well, that's just an acute example, but people can literally hold on to their emotions for a lifetime. So just being stoic and just getting through change, it has its utility. So like if you're in an emergency situation, if you're facing a situation, you just have to respond right now, literally in the moment. You might have to run across the street and avoid a car hurtling down towards you. You don't stop and go, hang on, car, can you hit the brakes there for a moment? I got to process my emotions right now because I'm quite afraid that you're going to kill me. No, you just get out of the way. You just suck all that emotion inside. You don't worry about that, but you'd eventually go home and debrief about feeling like you just faced a life-threatening situation. You deal with your emotions. So there's a time and place and even with athletes, an athlete on the field, on the ice, wherever you might be, I'm going to say to them, it's okay to just get over your emotions in that moment for that, 60 minutes or 120 minutes of the game, but make sure we go back and get through, stage 1 and stage two afterwards, because.
So Sean, one of the comments you made was that a person could hold on to their emotions a lifetime. Are you talking about being stuck in quadrant number 2?
Yeah.
Is that what that means?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, definitely. Well, not even being stuck, but being stuck not having done quadrant 2 properly. So if we go back to quadrant 1, so Kubler-Ross talked about grief and loss, and if there's some typical predictable norm in human reactions, which I called response. So the healthy thing is just to allow those reactions, just be with them. And so, someone dies or you lose someone and there's a serious breakup in a relationship, the first reactions would be, shock, like, has this really happened? Which might be followed by denial, this can't be happening, which might be followed by anger or frustration or fear. So they're kind of the very reactive emotions that, like, this can't be happening. Now, if someone goes to the denial stage, this can't be happening, they might jump just to that, just get over it. So they've started in stage 1, but they haven't allowed themselves to stay in it and just go, I'm allowed to feel these very strong emotional reactions. Yeah. They just go straight away, this can't be happening, I've just got to get on with life. I had a client a number of years ago. It was very, very distinct. It was a young girl whose father had died the previous year of cancer. It was tragic. And her mom had reached out to me and said, my daughter's really struggling, seems to be quite depressed, is quite anxious. And we started talking to her, and it wasn't like she was denying that her father died, but I asked her how she responded initially, and she said, well, I just got on with it. She got stuck back into her school, back into her sport. And you know what people around her said at the time? Look at you. Look how good you're doing. Look how strong you are. You're getting on with your life. And a year later, she's having a breakdown because she never really properly grieved for her father. And it wasn't her fault. So there's no judgment of that. But she didn't really go through 1, 2, and 3 at all. She just was like, just get on with life. And so our process psychotherapeutically was help her to go through stages 1, 2, and 3 to allow herself. She had to express her emotions, her fear, her frustration,
That is a great story, and I love the your quadrant here because the title is emotional blind spots, which is so perfect. It's like if you don't know, and just for our podcast listeners, Heath, there's the grid is showing emotions on one side, actions on another side, and then 4 different quadrants. One is response with your reactions. 2 is coping, normalizing the emotions and fatigue. 3 is meaning, finding meaning in the event, I guess, creating meaning and possibilities. And the 4th is commitment, persist with a purpose-driven action plan. So response, coping, meaning, commitment, from emotions right through to actions. I don't know if that's a good description or not, Sean, but I think for people that are just listening to this, they should hear those words with anyway.
I'm sure we can make it available for them to download a copy. So
yeah. Well, this to me, Sean, is something I'm going to put into a really simple analogy. It affects us at a really spiritual level at sometimes, as you shared in a really dynamic case there. But it can happen in just simple practical life of something so silly as a golf game or in a sporting event that you're competing in, and you're playing a great game of golf. And then all of a sudden, you shank a shot, it goes in the water, and you can't recover, and you're taking a double or a triple bogey. Well, this cycle happens in those moments in a competition that you got to go, oh, darn it. It's gone. More expletive words are used than that usually. And then how do I deal with this? And how do I go right through and change that meaning that the whole round isn't over and get all the way back into commitment to the original plan, the original process. Don't be focused on the results. Admit the fact that the game's hard. It's okay to make a mistake, and let's start fresh. Give yourself grace. So that's just a simple analogy in life where it's also applied in everyday life in things that are happening to us right now in a moment that isn't even an epic life-changing moment, that we can apply this knowledge that you've shared to change the outcomes of it. And that really hit me, I guess, I'm kind of paraphrasing it from my simpler view, is that the potential of any moment, right, is affected by my emotions, right? That coping in 2 then leads me immediately into an action based on my meaning that I put on it. That action then gets a result, which then drives that belief or meaning and all the way back up to the overall potential we have or the change that we're having, which you mentioned earlier. Is it going to be a negative change or is it a positive change based on that cycle of meaning that we put on it in that moment and the action that we take next, and then that cycle begins just from a real basic potential of growth cycle.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I rolled out this model with a couple of clients, a couple of businesses over here in Australia, just in response to what's going on with the COVID, the lockdown, the impact on business, people losing their jobs, pay cuts, and the uncertainty of where businesses are going to end up. And the question was, how do we help, and everyone working remotely, and how do we help people stay focused and working well, despite, given the challenge of the circumstances, the uncertainty and the fear. And, you could suggest that you'd think that people would be focused and working hard because of fear. I don't want to lose my job. Like right now, there are no jobs out there to go and apply for that easily. I've got to keep my job. I've got to stay focused. And we think that fear or pressure should keep us focused. But what's interesting is that fear is only a motivator for a very short space of time. It's a very fatiguing motivator because when you're in a state of fear, you're in that fight or flight response. Your brain has released adrenaline, noradrenaline, the sympathetic nervous system. Your fear is designed for a very quick, immediate response that comes and goes, and then it goes into shutdown recovery mode. The parasympathetic kicks in, and you relax, and you get very fatigued, and you recover. If you're constantly stimulating fear, you're constantly in an adrenaline state. You're constantly wearing yourself out. So people who are reliant on fear or pressure to motivate them to work will end up feeling less motivated to some degree, or in other words, discouraged, deflated, because it just isn't sustainable. And so, I'm talking to them as saying, you've got to address the fear so it no longer fatigues people. And we've got to get to quadrant 3, which is meaning, which we could also put the word purpose in there as well, is help them find reasons for why they're in this situation that help them lift their minds out of it so they can focus. And, I'm very careful here, and I'm going to click on the slide. There's another click here to say that, the other response of it, okay, we acknowledge that just get over it doesn't work, but there's a cousin to just get over it, which is definitely better. And you might identify this in yourselves, or in people, I call it just be positive. And it still skips stages 1 and 2. And stages 1 is respond, just be with those angry, reactive emotions. Don't judge them, just acknowledge them as normal. And stage 2 being coping, which is where you probably go more into the longer, fatiguing grief, sadness, discouraging, unmotivated feelings. Sometimes it can be a bit of relief as pressure comes off, but you're trying to cope. Make those first 2 stages of responding and coping, of just being with yourself as a human being, your emotions, the up ones, the down ones, and not judging them, just allowing yourself to go through those, are important. Because if you'll know those people, you might be one yourself. I've probably done it at times where you just jump straight to, hey, let's see the opportunity in this situation. What's positive? And this is what I'm seeing in a lot of business leaders right now in the current situation with COVID, as the world's sort of challenging, creating uncertainty, and for some falling apart around them. They're trying to be really positive with their staff, and that is good. It's definitely better than just getting over things. But similarly, if it causes people to bottle up their emotions and hold them inside, they get worn out anyway. And they still can have that same experience of being discouraged and fatigued and unmotivated. And then they feel even worse because they find that they can't just be positive. So I've just, if anything, the first 2 quadrants of response and coping, I say just be human first. Then we get to be positive. Then we get to get over it in a way. So it's like, we start with allow yourself to be human. There are no rules, respond, allow yourself your first responses to change and challenge and transition, be with your emotions. Don't make them wrong. Don't judge yourself for it. If you're looking at other people, allow them to give them permission to be human with that. So you get to the point in the bottom of the graph, we have a word called acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean acceptance for what has happened necessarily. Like if it's trauma, I don't have to say, I accept that has happened. You just say sort of an acceptance of me being human in the situation. It's okay for me to be struggling and challenged. And I'm at peace with this. Is a challenging time. And I've come to a level of acceptance that this is just who we are as humans in this situation. However, now we bounce into meaning, and we move into that 3rd quadrant where we say, well, what can you do with this situation? What can you do with the situation you're in right now? And if you've sort of come to terms with, I'm a human being having all my reactions, and I breathed in, I breathed out, and I face it. I've not made myself wrong. I've let go of judgment. You'll find that there's like an opening. There's an opening to say, what could I make it mean? There'll be automatic meaning. So when we go back to where I started, which is what are your tendencies right now? How do you perceive change and challenge and adversity? Your brain might automatically go, it means that we're doomed. If that's your brain's automatic meaning, you have to sort of acknowledge that and go, okay, that's not helping. You could go back to stages 1 and 2 again and go, okay, that's my normal response. There's nothing that might be built into the system. I might have learned that through role models. Like, did my mom or my dad always respond to it like that? Did my coaches or my teachers, did my culture around me, did they tend to be a bit more on that, oh, everything's doomed, and be on that more cynical side? And acknowledge that. But then we step into, okay, what meaning can you make out of the situation? So right now, businesses are scrambling, saying, well, look, I have a number, like yesterday I was on a call with a founder of a company, and they said, well, we never get a chance to build our human capability, our capacity, the kind of work that I do. Like, how do we function as a high performing team? We always say that we want to, but we never look that closely at some of the nuances of how we communicate or how we think or some of our mindsets. We have values on the wall, but are we really doing anything about them? We have a bit of time to actually figure out how to do some of that stuff right now. So they're going, oh, there's an opportunity to grow some of our human capability right now. Others are talking about, well, in my business, for example, and I imagine, Bob, you're similar, I've been talking for years about building more virtual capacity in my business, being able to have more online deliverables.
Yep.
And never seeming to have the more I get in front of people face to face, the less time I have to do that kind of work. Well, now I'm sitting in front of a computer, virtual, online all the time. Now's the time to look to innovate in that virtual way. And so that's the kind of positive meaning we talk about. We say we turn challenge and stress and uncertainty into opportunity. Now, remember, we can't do that very effectively if we haven't done response and coping and dealing with our emotions. So there's a bit of a rhythm to that. And there's nothing wrong with some regressions going back to those earlier stages of, you might feel uncertain and stressed again, acknowledge it, go through that process, get to a place and go back to your positive meaning. And then, so in positive meaning, we say what's possible, and we do some exploration of possibilities. But if we stayed only in meaning, we'd kind of be dreaming only. And that's where it's important to go, okay, what do we do with this? What's our commitment? How do we act on this and get in action and then really grow? And that's where we step into opportunity. We build resilience, we grow, and we achieve higher performance. But those things are at the outcome of going through those earlier stages.